You guys, you know how mycelial networks have like mushrooms that come up like they're the weird fruiting bodies? Right, so I'm the weird fruiting body of a mycelial network of people working at Earth Species Project. We're a nonprofit working on decoding non-human communication, that is animal language. And actually a couple of the people are here in this room, Katie Zakarian, my co-founder, and I just want you to imagine all those people behind me as I'm up here speaking. Just one sort of like framing thought is, if you're looking at the structure of humanity's problems, whether it's climate change or opioid epidemic, like what is the connecting thread between all of them? And I think if you think about it, it's that there's a narrow optimization for a narrow goal at the expense of the whole. Which is to say there's a kind of disconnection, which is at the root of all of the biggest problems that we face. And I'll return to that. But first, anyone know what animal makes this noise? Well, humans waiting. Louder. Oh, somebody shouted out seal early on, and that's exactly right. Well, very close. Not a whale. This is the bearded seal. I know. By the way, that was the mating call, so if you got excited, now you know where to go. All right, another one. I could go on all day about these things. Come find me later. But do you guys know this was discovered in 2013 that parrot parents will lean over for the first couple weeks of their chick's life, and for each of their chicks, they will whisper a unique name. The baby will babble it back until they get it right, and then they will use that unique name for the rest of their life, right? One more. I'm here to talk about animal language, but do you think that flowers or plants can hear? So I guess the trick question, but it wasn't that hard. University of Tel Aviv in 2019 did this incredible study where they took primrose flowers and they played different sounds to it, like traffic noises, bat noises, bee noises. And it turns out only when they played the sound of an approaching pollinator did the flower start to produce more and sweeter nectar within 3 seconds, right? So plants are hearing, and this gets us to, I think, this sort of fundamental precept that our ability to understand is limited by our ability to perceive. And what does AI do? Well, it throws open the aperture of that which we can perceive, which means we have the possibility to understand much more. This is the most humble graph that I know because it only includes all of time and all of space. But you can see, like, human experience is a tiny little sliver of it. And to me, when I look at this, I just feel awe and wonder for all that we don't know, all that we can't yet perceive. But again, I'm here to talk about animal language. Is there even really a there? Sure, they might emote to each other, but representational language? One of my favorite studies is a 1994 study from the University of Hawaii, where researchers taught dolphins 2 gestures. And the first gesture was, do something new. Do something you've never done before. That is to say, innovate. And that's actually a very complex thing to be able to communicate, but the dolphins will do it. They will remember everything they've done before that session, understand the concept of negation, not one of those things, and then invent whole cloth something new. Already amazing. But then they'll teach the dolphins a second gesture, do something together. And they'll say to dolphin pairs, do something you've never done before together. And the dolphins go down, exchange sonic information, and come up and do the very same thing they've never done before at the same time. Doesn't prove that there's language, but sort of like, I think, Occam's razor, like the burden of proof is now on the other foot. But then how would you go about transiting a language if you don't have a Rosetta Stone? And it turns out that this was a thing that humans couldn't do up until the year 2017. When suddenly AI gained the ability to translate between languages without a Rosetta Stone, without even any examples. How? Well, if you want to understand one thing about AI, It's that AI, one of the fundamental things that it does is that it turns relationships into distances and directions. It turns semantic relationships between concepts into geometry. So this is English. This is the top 10,000 most spoken words in English. And what's interesting about this shape is that words that mean similar things are placed near each other, and words that share a semantic relationship share a geometric relationship. So in this shape, king is the same distance direction to man, and woman is to queen, as boy is to prince, as girl is to princess. Now, this shape is actually in 300 dimensions, but that's a little big for my brain, so we just put it down into 3. Okay. So here's sort of the thought. Like, is there a shape that represents a language? And it turns out if you start putting all of the words next to each other, it's like solving a massive multidimensional Sudoku puzzle. If you think about the word dog, well, dog has a relationship with friend and to guardian and to howl and to yelp, to wolf to cat. If you think about all the different relationships it has, it sort of fixes it in a point in space. Right? And you do that for every word to every other word, out pops a rigid structure that represents a language. Now, the computer doesn't know what anything means, it just knows how they all relate. Well, okay, if I can build this shape for English, can I build this shape for other languages like Spanish? Yeah, absolutely. Could they possibly share a similarity in shape? And at the time, most linguists would say no, because different languages have different cosmologies, different ways of viewing the world. And yet the machine was like, whatever, let's try. And it worked. You can take the shape, which is English, and the shape, which is Spanish, and rotate one on top of each other. And even though there are words in one that don't exist in the other, if you blur your eyes, their overall shapes are the same, and the point, which is dog, ends up in the same spot in both. And you're like, okay, but English and Spanish are super related. How about German? How about Japanese? Turns out also works. Every human language appears to fit in some kind of universal human meaning shape. Right? From Turkish to Esperanto to Finnish, which is a particularly weird language. Right? And I think this is incredibly beautiful, right? In a moment of such deep division, there is some hidden underlying structure that unites us all. I think it's a thing you could then say is like, well, obviously the thing we wanted to try to do, and this is the thing that started Earth Species. There are lots of this is now 2017 tech, which is Stone Age in AI. So there are other techniques, but this is the conceptual thing that got us going. And the obvious thing is like, can you build the shape for English, or humans build the shape for animal communication and match them up? But I think an interesting point that people made early on was like, okay, but human beings share the same wetware, the same hardware, we have the same sensorium, we have the same Umwelt, to use the German word. But actually, it goes deeper than this. There's something even deeper going on in AI. And I'll just take one example here, which is, you guys, I'm sure, have seen all of the AI image generation like things, Midjourney, DALL-E, where you type in text and out comes an image that's never existed before. Well, how do those things work? Well, it works sort of like this. You build the shape for language, but then you can actually build the shape for images. And now it's no longer a king is to man. It's like face to smiling version of that face. And then I take like a man's face to the smiling version of his face, a woman's face to the smiling version of her face. You have a shape that represents all the relationships between images. You look at image caption pairs to align the two, and then you just find this spot in language, portrait of Chile as a person. It's right there. Translate it over to image space and say, hey, AI, generate the image that goes there, and that's how it works. So you're actually translating between two different modalities. And it turns out this works for almost everything, whether it's code, whether it's brain scans of fMRI. AI is learning how to create shapes that let you translate to and from over almost everything. This was my face when I finally saw this and understood what was going on. right? And so it's actually just useful for everyone to know that when you see these new demos of AI, now you type it in and it codes up something new, it's actually the same demo. You realize that everything that can be translated will be translated. Come find me later and we can talk about the implications of that. All right, so this was the core concept, right? Like, can we build this shape for animal communication? And the answer is yes, we can, but it's really hard because, well, I'll get into the why, but working with data from our biology partners out in the field, turns out there's noise and there's like wind and there are lots of animals speaking. It takes a lot of work. You don't just get a whole bunch of animals speaking to microphones. And the thought is like, well, should we expect there to be anything that's the same? Why should we expect there to be anything that you can just translate from one to the other? And it's, I think, because we actually share a lot of our experience with animals, even though there's a lot. Say, sperm whales spend 80% of their life a kilometer deep, seeing only with sound because it's completely dark down there. But what other things do we share? Like, what might animals communicate about? These are dolphins looking in a mirror, having, I think, the most universal human experience, which is you look in a mirror and then you check out your abs. And these are from a series of experiments called mirror tests. And mirror tests are a way of checking to see, does something have self-awareness? Right? The way that works is you paint a dot on an animal, they're unaware of it, they look in the mirror, they see the dot in the reflection, they investigate it. And to do that, they have to associate that thing that I am seeing in there, that is me. I have self-awareness. And so if they are communicating, they may well be communicating about a rich sense of interiority. By the way, elephants do pass the mirror test, but for the longest time, scientists thought that they didn't, and it turned out the reason why is because they were using small mirrors. It's very, very human. All right, these are lemurs getting high. They take hits off of centipedes, and they get into these trance-like states. They get super cuddly. It's essentially proto-Burning Man. They seek some kind of transcendent state. It turns out dolphins do the same thing. Dolphins will intentionally inflate pufferfish in a circle, hit them off their nose to get high off their venom, and pass them around. So it's the original puff, puff, pass. So there is some, I mean, chimps will spin on vines to get dizzy. There is something about reaching altered and transcendent states of consciousness that seems to be shared. So if they communicate, they may be communicating about some of the most transcendent experiences that beings can have. But of course, there is a whole bunch of the experience that we do not share with animals. We don't get to see in ultraviolet light. Right? We don't see as sound as bats do. One of the things I find most amazing is that whales and dolphins have been communicating vocally, passing down dialects that become mutually unintelligible languages, passing down culture for 34 million years. Can you imagine the wisdom that is contained in something that's had to survive 34 million years? And whatever it is that is the solution to humanity's problems, I'd argue it's not in our imagination. Because if it was, we'd probably be trying to do it. So we are looking for things outside the sphere of human imagination. And where better to look than in these ancient wisdom traditions? All right, another guessing game. What animal makes these sounds? I can't say. I didn't. These These are all good guesses. These are beluga. These are beluga whales, yeah. And what's interesting, you heard all that digital clicking. None of that is added. That is just a hydrophone, a microphone in water. That's what they sound like. And it turns out they speak, it seems, in more modem-like packets. To me, this sounds like an alien modem. And when they say hello, they say both their name, and also they include their clan identity. Like, from where are they from? Now, the amazing thing, oh, and one other thing, like, we hear up to 20 kilohertz. They speak up to 150 kilohertz. So the thing that really blew my mind is we were talking with one of our partners, Dr. Valeria Vergara. She puts tags on belugas, on whales, that records like video and audio and motion. And she said in her work, where she discovered that they have names and also, say their clan, she had to throw away 97% of her data because she can't tell who's speaking or they're overlapping. And here's where your eyes should get big, because you're like, the most vocal underwater species with the greatest vocabulary, the supermajority of all of their communication has never been analyzed by Western science. Oh my God, right? This is where frontiers get discovered. And why is it so hard? Well, it's because this is what they're like in the wild. They're constantly moving around. So even if you have a tag on them, it's hard to know still who's speaking. By the way, the ocean is what, like 5% explored? Beluga communication is less explored than our oceans. But the way you start working on this is Ari Friedlander, Dr. Ari Friedlander, another one of our partners working down in Antarctica, putting tags on humpback whales, and you can see they record video, they record audio. We started to use AI to learn how to listen to multiple animals speaking at the same time and separate them into their own individual tracks. And then two, it's not enough just to listen to the audio. Like you saw, like the animals move, there's body poses, there's a whole multimodality to communication. If anyone here has gone to a foreign country and you don't speak that language, somehow you still manage to communicate. How is that? It's not all just verbal, it's extra linguistic. So we just had, we're really excited, late last year, published with a whole slew of other scientists, our roadmap for saying this has to be solved not just verbally, but multimodally, and put out the roadmap to do so. And to get an understanding is we now go back to that idea of everything can be translated to and from, right? Because now you can say, all right, given this motion, the monkey moved this way, what sound did it make, right? It turns out ship strikes are one of the leading causes of whale death. What sound did one whale make to cause another whale to dive? Now, that might mean there is food down there, or it might be there's danger up here, but either way it causes the behavior of diving. But now you can say, what sound did one whale make to make the other whale dive quickly and open its mouth as if to feed? Like, we can start to experiment as we do multimodal translation. And this gives a sense of another mechanism behind which we can start to get to decoding. One sort of final place, getting to unlocking communication. And it should be clear, because often the easiest way to talk about what we're doing at Earth Species is saying, well, we're learning how to talk to animals. But that's wrong. The goal is not to learn how to speak. The goal is to learn how to listen, right? Because we do not change when we speak. We change when we listen. This is one of our partners, Dr. Michel Fournet, in the documentary Fathom. And this is starting to get to the place of, can we, though, test our hypotheses? How do we know when we're right? Getting to these kinds of contact moments. So let me just play this.
The oldest cultures are not human. They're from the ocean. 40 million years ago, before we walked upright, before we sparked fire, whales evolved to build relationships in the dark.
I'm trying to start a conversation is the most basic way you can say it. I'm going to put a speaker in the ocean and talk to a whale and hope it talks back.
Starting playback.
If this work is successful, it will be the first experiment where we have engaged in a dialogue with a humpback whale.
The punchline is that it works. Do you all want to know how to say hello in humpback whale? Yes? All right. I use my hand. It's not necessary, but I just find it like gets the breath right. It sounds like this. Good hand gesture. Apparently, if you get really good at it, you also include your name. I haven't gotten that good. One of we went up to visit. Whenever we do our experiments, we always do it with biologists. And a couple of years ago, we went up with a couple of biologists to recreate Michelle's work. And we were just observing on this boat. And this is actually a picture I took the morning of this experiment, is out in Alaska, one of these like very foggy days, but the sun was still very bright, and so everything was just vivid whiteness in every direction, and birds are flying from nowhere to nowhere, and you could hear the humpbacks breathe, but you couldn't see them. And if you haven't heard a humpback breathe, it sounds like this, like sort of like, I don't know, like Darth Vader doing yoga. It's actually very meditative. And the scientists had recorded the day before some humpback whale, and they started the experiment. And almost immediately, a humpback that we hadn't seen came lunging at the boat from around 30 meters away, its mouth half open. And every couple of seconds, like 10 seconds later, it came from the other side. Then 10 seconds, it kept investigating and looking for 10 minutes until the experiment ended, and the humpback then swam away. And so we went down and asked the scientists, like, what happened? They're like, well, every time we called, the humpback would call back immediately. And it turned out after we identified the whale, because every whale, just like we have a thumbprint, they have a fluke print. You can tell their identity. It turned out that accidentally, this was a form of mirror test that had just been conducted. The scientists were playing this humpback's own call back to itself. And you can hear, like that, you saw the speaker, that speaker is small. The humpback is big. The humpback's name, well, humans gave it, was Twain. And you can hear on the recording our speaker go, I'm Twain. And then the humpback go, I'm Twain. And can you imagine how trippy it must have been to, like, you've been living for 38 years and suddenly you discover yourself? One of the things, though, is that I'm actually not sure whether that experiment should have been done. It's unclear to me, because one of the weird things about AI is that we will be able to communicate fluently before we understand what we're saying, right? It's almost as if you have this superpower. You walk up to anyone in the world, you cock your head on the side, and you listen to them speak. You don't know what they're saying, but you're like, oh, I see, this sound comes after this sound in these cases, and this sound after this sound in these cases. You just start babbling. You have no idea what you're saying, but the other person's like, wow, that is so wise. That's essentially what AI can do. And the reason why I like telling this story is it says we're going to need very, very soon a whole set of ethics as we have the technical capabilities of making contact with 34-million-year-old cultures. We need some kind of Geneva Convention for cross-species communication, or a prime directive if you're into Star Trek. We need to figure out what it is we're saying before we go out into the world and start saying it. I don't know if you guys know this, but humpback whale song goes viral. For whatever reason, humpback whales off the coast of Australia are the K-pop singers. And their song can be picked up in a couple of seasons by much of the world population. We don't know why. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. So if you just create a synthetic whale that sings, you may create some kind of viral meme that disrupts their culture. We might create, I don't know, like a whale QAnon or something. So we have to be really careful. And to me, this is the whole point in the first place, is to change our relationship with the rest of nature, to take seriously the other cultures of Earth. And so we're starting now. I know, these are zebrafinch. With our first, actually this month we've already started our first two-way AI animal fluent conversation test with non-wild populations of these songbirds. And you can sort of hear the first bit is a real, and the second half is AI generated. It's sort of like prompt response. You can't really tell. What this means, of course, is that we really are at this cusp. Do you guys remember 1995? I think it was December 18th. If someone knows this, I'll be like, oh my God. That was when the Hubble telescope was pointed at the empty patch in sky. And what was discovered was, of course, anything but emptiness. What was discovered was the most number of galaxies we'd ever seen in one spot. We pointed at nothing, and what we discovered was everything. That is what new scientific tools enable. Like, our ability to understand is limited by our ability to perceive. We are about to throw open the aperture of that which we can perceive. We're going to point this at something that we as like Western science has thought was empty, like animal communication, animal language, animal culture, and what we're going to discover, I think, is everything. And in that sense of the goal of Earth species really is to be, there is no such thing as a silver bullet, but I think there might be silver buckshot, like one little part of changing the myths we tell ourselves. If Joan Didion says we tell ourselves stories in order to live, I might amend it to say, and we tell ourselves myths to know who we are. Many myths represent that point of disconnection, as we, in the very beginning, could speak as humanity with animals and with nature, and that point of disconnection is often represented as our inability to communicate. What happens when we can rewrite our myths that actually we can, that we reconnect, and maybe it's something like AI becomes, in the very best world, like the invention of the telescope, where the telescope let us look out at the patterns of the universe and discover that Earth was not the center. Maybe this time we can look out at the patterns of the universe and discover that humanity is not the center. Thank you.